Okay, so pre-production. This is like, while world building takes the most time and doing your development takes the most time, this is the part where everybody usually just goes, whoop. You know, because doing this stuff, this is like, oh no, now I have to like call people on the phone and use money and like do all this like real people stuff, and like that part is like challenging, but it's not as challenging as a lot of the other things that you are going to be managing. Like human beings. Human beings are so much harder than booking a venue. And like, once you get yourself over that initial hurdle of like, okay, I'm just gonna call this place and book a date. Once you've done it, it's done. You don't have to think about it, you don't have to worry about it again. And again, there are resources, there are people who can help you with these things. You can divide and conquer, get a team surrounding you, somebody who might be like really great at logistics, who can help you with all the planning stuff that you need to do if it's not your strong suit.
So maybe you'll talk about this later, but how do you put together your team?
Oh.
How do you find and put together a team?
That's a great question. I talked a lot about like roles and responsibilities, but in terms of like team construction, that's a great question, and it's something that I don't address like in the slides. But let's take some time to talk about it.
I would like to point out that in those heist movies, they never actually show how they find the people. They just seem to know all the right people.
Yeah.
And waving the hard part.
Because you're George Clooney in that scenario, right? So you're just like, yeah, I know everyone. It's fun.
Is there a listserv for the LARP community of Boston?
There is a Boston LARP Slack group, which is joinable. What's that? There's a Boston LARP Slack group. There's also a Boston Game Dev Community Slack group, which is another place you could find a lot of LARPers. Mm-hmm.
Would you be willing to post the links for those
in
the
totally.
event page?
Absolutely. There's also a Boston LARP listserv. That's Boston LARPers, I believe. Boston LARP Society, yes, exactly.
GBLS is, I mean, they're running probably LARPs here, so
yes,
that's like an organization rather than a clearinghouse.
Exactly. And they only make announcements. I don't think that you can like post to that group to find team members and things like that. But another great way is like go to conventions, meet people, like find people who you just jive with well, and develop those relationships. Also, LARPers love an excuse to like get together and do like social activities. So I happen to know that there's a secret society that has frequent meetings that is filled with LARPers.
Really? Who would that be? I have no idea.
Would you like to pitch us on the Oddfellows and tell us all about the Oddfellows?
Yeah, so one of the groups that I'm a part of is the Oddfellows, which are very much like the Masons, and it's secret society, except excuse me.
It allows people of all genders.
Yes, it allows people of all genders and persuasions to join whatever sect of the Oddfellows you like. And at the Oddfellows Hall in Belmont, which is Friendship Lodge number 20, it is pretty much filled with, we've pretty much filled it with a lot of LARPers from various sections of the community.
Yeah, it's like LARPers, academics, theater kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we all get together in our secret society clubhouse every week and we hang out. And, our meetings turn into Monty Python sketches and it's kind of fun.
Yeah, and like they do, like you organize tons of like community service events and fundraisers.
Secret society, is it findable on Google?
Secret society is totally findable on Google. Secret society. Right.
The fourth Monday of every month is usually our open night because we usually have like our business meetings, which are usually closed unless you're like an initiate.
What was the name of this again?
The Oddfellows. The Independent Order of Oddfellows, and Friendship Lodge number 20 in Belmont. Although, feel free to join any lodge if you're interested. Please look into Odd Fellowship. It's a lot of fun. We also, like Carolyn was saying, do charitable works. We regularly do stuff at
St. Francis House.
St. Francis House, thank you.
Yeah. How do I know more about this than you?
Because I generally don't pay attention.
I'm just sharp today. I'm just on it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we're gonna talk about budgeting. Budgeting is not that hard. Basically, it breaks down to two different things. You're going to have revenues, which is money that you are going to have coming in, usually just from players buying tickets and things like that. And you're going to have expenses. I've got some rules of thumb here, and I have a budget sample spreadsheet, which I'm happy to share with everybody. It's a spreadsheet that I make available to everyone in the world who would like it. I'll show you that in a moment. But I've got some like general rules of thumb as you're kind of going through your budgets and determining different things. Number one, don't spend more than you make, like duh. Otherwise, you're going to have to like personally put capital in, which you can do if you would like to. If you want to, if you want to blow thousands of dollars on creating a high production value LARP that you don't get paid back for, then like, I mean, I guess go you. You're making art. That's great. I have definitely done that.
Just be careful not to get sued for the remainder.
You're right, exactly. But we have insurance for that. We'll get to that in a minute. So budgeting, so price things out and make a priority list of things that are nice to have versus things that you must have in order for your game to operate. If you are running a game about, people who all live in a crystal matrix world and everyone has a special crystal, then like, maybe you should get crystals. I don't know. Like, but you could also probably get away with just like printing out tags. It's like special crystal, yours is purple. Like that could be fine too. Like there are ways to production hack that are phenomenal. Which brings me to production hacking. I forgot to put in a slide in for this. We'll get to that later. Remind me to tell you about production hacking because I have some really good kind of like tips and tricks for like low budget ways. No, let's talk about it now. We're talking about budgeting. Okay, low budget ways to make things, to take your events from like, we're in a boardroom with a bunch of tags to like way, way better. Number one, lighting. Just like lighting is the fastest way to create visual environments for people and take them into an entirely different immersive space. You can get lighting for very cheap. There are, you can, like on Amazon, you have like uplighting, like track uplighting that you can like put around the corners of your room and like network together. That you can get like these lights for like $8 a pop. They're not that expensive and they make a huge, huge difference. Lighting plus fabric, you can like transform any space into anything you want. Like fabric or you can go to the hardware store, buy black plastic sheeting, clear plastic sheeting, white plastic sheeting. You can buy canvas sheeting and like paint on it, draw on it, do all these things. These are super, super cheap ways to be able to completely transform your space, and they are not going to cost you that much. You can build it into your budget and build it into the cost of tickets for players, and really like that'll stretch your dollar a really, really long way. The other really great way to do production hack is sound. This is one of the things that people always overlook. And it is so tragic because you can completely transform a space using nothing but sound if you want to. If you walked into this room and I was playing like smooth jazz, you would have an entirely different feeling about what's happening here than if you walk into this space and I'm playing like EDM. And there are tons and tons of different soundscapes available. There are free apps that have soundscape creation programs. I use an app called Ambiance, which allows you to take different looped background sounds, layer them together, and then also put them into playlists so that you can, like, from your phone in the corner of the room, control the soundscape of what's happening by like flipping through your playlist and adding and removing different sounds.
What's it called?
Ambiance. So there's a big difference between a soundscape and music. And know the difference and know which one you want to create. I think that it can be, music is very powerful, but it also can take you out of a moment because a soundscape will just give you an idea of your environment, whereas music will tell you what to feel. And sometimes if what the music is telling you to feel doesn't match with what your character is feeling, it can really break your immersion and really like hurt the environment. So, try to make sure that you are kind of like...
Unless the music's diegetic.
Exactly, unless your music is diegetic, exactly. Like in the case of Draw Somewhere, right, where Like, the music is an essential part of the experience. So yes, in order to have good sound, you probably want to like invest some money in having a somewhat decent speaker system. It doesn't have to be that fancy. Like a little Google Home speaker will go a really long way, and those are like $20. You can get other like higher quality speakers, but things that are Bluetooth enabled speakers where you can play it off your phone or you can hook it up to a computer and play various things. It will take you a really, really long way. Over time, your collection of like speaker equipment and lighting equipment will grow to the point where you suddenly have bins and bins full of like lights and DJ equipment and sound and other stuff like that. And it seems complicated, but it's really not that hard. So it is the easiest way to production hack and like make things feel really different and really immersive for people, without having to spend extraordinary amounts of money or time on like costuming or budget or like props or like other environmental pieces. So yeah, those are my really good like tips for production hacking. Also, good tip for production hacking: try to find spaces. We'll get to this in venues, but try to find spaces that already have a lot of what you want, so that you don't have to do a lot of additional set dressing. Like Dowd was just telling us about this space that he found that's going to be amazing for a cyberpunk setting. Like, it's already so cyberpunk that you're not gonna have to do much. Throw some neon in it, done. You know, it's gonna be great.
I'll add that, you know, I've had so far a lot of these places where I go, I see a place and I'm like, this invokes something I can build from there.
Absolutely. I do that too. Like I like, so because I'm always ready to run a LARP, as I walk around and find and see different spaces in different venues, I'm like, what LARP could be here? What LARP could be here? I often like design for spaces. So that can be a huge source of inspiration too. If you find a really cool venue, it can be a great way to like have an inspiration for a game that you want to run there.
Sort of like how Wizards Unite seems to rent out college campuses.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so price things out, make a priority list of things you must have and things that are nice to have. And then ask for community assistance. Like a lot of games will create like an Amazon wish list of properties that they need either for the entire run of their production or just for that event. And then ask players who have the means to buy those things and send them to them. And that gets usually incredible responses because your community wants to help you, but they don't want to like pay to win. And pay to win is just not a fun thing for anybody. So asking people to like give back to the game by donating like what they can in terms of like actually buying a prop or a costume piece or masks or whatever it is, and then giving those to the game can be a really great way to make somebody feel like they're contributing to game and that they're involved with the production. I would avoid like many games will give people experience or like some kind of in-game reward for doing that. You can do that if you want to, but I feel that that's like kind of inaccessible for people, and I personally don't encourage that. Different people have different feelings about it, but I think that it creates like a class issue, which I think is a problem. So I would say, reward them in other ways. Be like, oh, thank you so much for like contributing to the game in this way. We're going to, name the pavilion after your character, kind of thing. Like things that are like fun little Easter egg things, like that. Or like, oh, do you want to help us like design this section of the boating community that you're from? Like ask for their help in other ways for them to like feel more a part of it. Because they're giving you those things because they want to be a part of it, and they want that, like, that's them signaling to you that they care about your game. So rewarding them in other ways that make them feel more integrated into the game is a really good way to go about it, I think.
This works for the particular game that Dean and I are in. It's a 1920s, kind of roaring 20s kind of setting.
Yeah.
And so if you contribute, there's a fairly low cap of what your character personally gets. And then anything over that cap goes into the community pool.
That's cool.
So as a player, oh, I'm helping out everyone else, but it's roaring 20s. Like staff is just like coming into the game with money anyway, so it's just like, oh, we added another 10% in. So from a staff perspective, they're like, whatever.
Right.
But as a player, you're like, cool, I got like almost literally a cookie.
Yeah.
And I know that other people are getting cookies too.
Right, exactly. I love that. So if you're doing meals, if you're budgeting for meal costs, as a rule of thumb, I tend to budget between $6 to $8 per person per meal. If you're doing it yourself, if you're getting catering, it's going to be a lot more than that. It's going to be probably like between like double that. I would say like between $13 and $20 per person per meal. So be aware that those costs are involved. And then don't forget to count your staff. This will happen all the time. People will be like, oh, well, we have like 25 players signed up. So I bought food for 26 people. And then you have like 15 staff who are like, what do we eat? And you're like, I'm gonna order a pizza. Oh God. Keep in mind that you need to budget for like staff, and that includes like staff that might show up too. Like you might have people who are coming to help day of that you're not necessarily counting for. It's better to have more food and give it away to people at the end than it is to have people go hungry.
That was one of the reasons that I loved Outpost so much.
Yeah.
Is because like they put the food on the players kind of where
Yes.
The players were creating like breakfast and lunch and dinner, and the staff would come out and like if like the incentive was if you have enough food, feed an NPC and the NPC will give you extra supplies so that the people on your team don't die.
Yeah, and that was great because then they didn't need to worry about the budgeting on their side for doing food stuff. They said this is a game in which the costs of food are not included. You need to provide your own food. We're not going to provide food for you. And we will give you an in-game reward if you feed other people at the game too. What ended up happening with that is this like huge communal potluck thing where every mealtime, players and staffers are all together sharing food, having great conversations, and also like people really like tried to outshine each other in the kitchens. So you ended up with some really freaking amazing meals. So it was really great. It was a really smart mechanism for making people feel really good about like having food be a communal part of your experience.
I have kind of a random thought there. Could you eliminate, because you were talking about the class restrictions, could you make that something like, we will give you a bonus and everyone you feed, so like something like the sated bonus or whatever from
Sure.
Video games use?
Yeah, absolutely.
That
You
be
can
a good
build
way
whatever system is going to reinforce the behavior that you want.
I just wondered if you thought that would be a good way to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. At Outpost, like it was, there were like you needed to have a certain number of supplies by the end of the session.
Oh, okay.
And so, a way of getting supplies was feeding an NPC, and the NPC would then give you a supply, and you'd be like, oh, thank you, here's your reward for that.
Oh, okay.
So it was
Hey, thanks, buddy. Just fell off the back of the truck.
Exactly. Okay, so let's take a look at some budgets, and we'll talk about some line item stuff. Okay, so this is my sample LARP budget. I have a bit.ly here if you want to view this LARP budget in real time. bit.ly/LARP budget. We're gonna take a look at it for realsies right now. Okay, so here I have your expenses. So this is I'm making the assumptions here that this is a 4 events that you're running. If you have a single, if this is a one-off game, then you obviously are only going to have the blue column. If it's a longer game, you might want to make more rows or additional sheets that are based off of this for different years or different arcs or whatever. So you have your budgeting on this side. So and then your actuals on this side, so you can compare about as you go along, you will make mistakes with your budget and you will learn. But having some good rules of thumb is going to be really important to start out with. So you're going to have site rental fees, unless you own a space, in which case, you're my new best friend. You're going to have some insurance cost. Most games, especially games that have any kind of physical combat, you'll want to have an event insurance policy. If you don't have, I'll get into this later when we talk about insurance, but you will either need event insurance, or you will need to be covered by a LARP organization that has a broader policy for all of the events that they run throughout the year. It can be useful to be a part of those things because the cost for everyone goes way down if you have many events running under the same banner, which is why a lot of LARP organizations exist and have multiple games running, is because now they have the cost of the insurance for them for the entire year is like $700. It's a $700 policy for the year versus a $300 policy for each person for each event. Yeah.
It's amortized over multiple events.
Exactly. Food, like obviously it's a teeny tiny food budget. So, like I would say use, like if you're going to be providing food, use that rule of thumb of like between $6 and $8 per head if you're doing it yourself. If you're doing it yourself, you're gonna need someone to make that food. So you're gonna wanna try to recruit someone on staff who has experience with like managing a large kitchen, because producing food for 10 people is hard. Producing food for 80 people is extraordinarily hard. And producing food for 300 plus people is a monster task. So, keep that in mind. There are lots and lots of different philosophies about like feeding people at scale. There are like entire blogs dedicated to this purpose that are like I've found so many different resources through like soup kitchen communities and people who are like providing food at scale to people, and ways to like just really hack your budget down to like bare bones to be able to like you could produce a meal for 100 people for $500, like a huge meal. Like that's amazing to be able to have that much food for such a low amount of money. So those things exist out there. As a general rule of thumb, like grains and pastas stretch a really long way, but it's very difficult to, unless you have a giant like rice cooker, it's hard to produce rice at scale. It's also hard to produce pasta at scale because it'll like get really soggy and soupy and stuff. So like batch production is what you tend to do. I'm gonna stop talking about food. You're not here for that.
I'm always here.
Properties. So these are like the actual props you're going to be using in your game. You can make an Amazon wish list. You can make a whatever wish list, or something that doesn't support like the horrific horrors of capitalism wish list. Costuming. A lot of LARPs will have like some costuming budget that they set aside that they will be able to reimburse their staffers for, but up to a certain point, because costuming can get really wonderful really fast. So if you're like, well, this character needs fully customized armor, like beautiful leather armor that is going to be made by Savage Pug Studios, then you're going to be spending more money on it than your LARP production can probably support. And it's not really fair to ask your player community to pay for that like armor for an NPC. So staff costuming might be willing to reimburse you like up to a cost of $50 for like different NPC costumings, things like that. So setting aside a budget for that costuming budget, and also just buying like generic robes and generic like blacks and generic like tech vests and generic whatever you need in bulk, is what you'll use some of that initial costuming budget for. Often you can find LARP yard sales, where after LARPs close, they have a giant auction or yard sale, and you can find really cool stuff like weaponry and costuming pieces and a giant bin full of all the same tabard. Wonderful, instantly NPC costuming, right? Office supplies. LARP, in my experience, have a huge need of office supplies. You're going to be printing out stuff. In a pinch, if you don't have a physical property for something, you make a tag, right? Like you're like, ooh, this is a crystal gem, purple. So office supplies are important. Having a printer on hand is really useful. Making an investment up front for your game to have a printer that you can bring to game consistently, and the toner for that printer, factor it in. You're gonna run through that printer ink real fast at game if you're at a campaign game especially. So build that cost in initially. Administrative fees. This might be like expenses for your banking, expenses like PayPal fees, like other stuff like that. Just like thinking about other administrative fees that are going to arise. Like keep those things in your budget. And then your revenues. Your revenues are largely going to come from players, right? So ideally, what you're going to have happen is people will hear about your game, they're gonna like the idea, they're gonna read your rule set and all your wonderful tone documents and your aesthetics and all the other things that you're creating, and they're gonna say, I'm going to go to that game, and then they'll purchase a pass, right? They'll purchase either a pass for themselves and maybe they'll be able to buy some a scholarship. That's something that like a lot of LARPs have been building in, which I think is really wonderful. Having the ability for players to have a pay what you can kind of sliding scale, saying like the average ticket for this game is $50, but if you can't pay that, pay what you can. And if you can pay more than that, then please give us as much money as you would like, up to like $200 as a suggested donation. Then you'll be able to sponsor like 4 other people's good time kind of thing. And I have found that works extraordinarily well. Like people who have the means are extraordinarily generous with them because they want the community to have more accessibility and more diversity. And so I think it's really important to kind of institute those systems. But having an average of what you think that you want people to support is really good to do because you need to kind of set the expectation. Because also like if people can't afford the $50 ticket, but they're like, but I would really like to give you some money towards this, can I give you $20? Then you can be like, absolutely, totally. Like, so, leaving that open. So you're gonna have like, money in here for new players and returning players. Like you might have different prices. Like it might be that new players are a lower price point than returning players because you're trying to attract people into your game, things like that. So you'll have revenues from that. Now, ideally, what will happen is people will give you money up front and you will use that money to buy all the things you need, and then you'll have everything you need. In reality, what happens is that you need to buy a lot of this stuff kind of like pretty far in advance so that you can get everything worked out the way you need to. So having a LARP organization that can give you some upfront funds that you can then kind of pay back is a really useful way to go about it. There are a number of different LARP organizations that support this model. I know that Red Feather Role Playing supports this model. I know that Be Epic supports this model. The Adaways organization, Mike, yep, and Kindle, I think also supports this model. So there are, LARP running organizations out there that are, designed to do this. I have never had a game where I needed to get any upfront funding from a LARP organization because I'm just like, I'm experienced at this point, so now I know how far in advance I need stuff, and I'm usually able to balance my cash flows so that I have the cash on hand that I need to buy the props for later. So having timing out your registration to say like, you can do this by giving people an early bird pricing option and saying like, if you register by this date, then it is, $15 cheaper than if you register by this date, is a really great way to do that so you have the cash on hand to be able to like start buying the stuff you need to buy. Usually you're not going to need to give all of your site rental fees up front. Some places you'll have to do, maybe 20%, maybe 50% of a down payment, but you can usually negotiate your way out of that. So just ask. Just be like, can I pay you day of or pay you after? And most of them will be like, yeah, okay, absolutely. Or you can negotiate it down and be like, hey, can I give you like 10% down payment instead of 50? And don't be afraid to negotiate on that stuff, and so you can balance your cash flows. That's it. So keep track of what you think you're going to spend. Then keep track of what you actually spend. I would say design a policy for your staffers about like if they're buying props and costuming, how you're going to have them submit their expenses to you. You could create a Google form or a Wufoo form or some other form that allows them to submit receipts that you then have a tracking mechanism. This is going to become important for when you're doing your taxes later. You do not want to have this on your own taxes. So you're going to want to either create a separate bank account or utilize a LARP organization that already has these systems set up so you don't have to create a separate company in order to do it. But if you do want to create your own company, you can create a nonprofit organization so that none of this stuff comes off of your taxes. You can do this as a community organization. A 501c7 is usually it's like a membership-based organization. And LARPs fall under that. You can actually probably get a 501c3 designation at this point. We're at that point in America right now where suddenly LARPs are being recognized as a legitimate art form. And so getting a 501c3 designation may be something you can do. The differences between 501c3 and a 501c7 are that 501c3, you'll be able to apply for grant funding and get other like interesting sources of funding. 501c7, you can't get grant funding, but you still are tax exempt. So if you're gonna create those organizations for yourself, it's actually not terribly hard to do it. If you go to LegalZoom, it'll take you $500 and maybe an hour of time for you to be able to create all the documents you need to do that stuff. But that said, there are LARP organizations out there that exist that already have these structures in place. I would recommend finding one whose philosophies you align with and utilizing those structures that are already there so that you don't have to go through the trouble of doing that. Down here I've got kind of like the master budget. Registrations is a separate tab so you can kind of keep track of what players have paid you, what players haven't. If a player is hey, can I pay you in cash? Then you can kind of keep track of that stuff. Food costs, again, just having a spreadsheet for okay, cost per head, I'm going to assume $8 per meal. We're giving people one meal, 20% buffer, just to make up for it, and then you'll have your kind of total costs, and that feeds back into your master budget. Make sense? Cool, now you know everything about budgeting.
Can you go over, would you be interested in going over one of your productions that you learned the most from, and how maybe even compare to a recent one where so basically noob and then pro level, and see some of what you learned and what happened?
Sure.
I know you have those experiences. I did this
definitely.
as a noob and it was awful, and I did this as a pro and it was amazing.
Yes, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now.
Okay.
Let me get through the rest of this,
Yeah.
and then I think we'll we'll discover those things
study,
around as we round table it a little bit. Venues. Okay, so finding a venue can be challenging, but don't be afraid to get creative with it. Sometimes it's better to ask forgiveness than permission. That said, there are places that classically will be very accepting and welcoming to LARPers. And when I say get creative, I've done things I'll go to a bar and be hey, would it be cool if I had 35 people show up here on a Tuesday night? They'll be drinking and eating things, and they're that's cool. And they don't know that a LARP is happening. But they also don't need to know. But sometimes, you tell people that, the staff will get super into it, and they're that's so cool. Can I pass a secret message to people? And you're yeah, totally.
Oh my god, yeah. I remember that.
Yeah, absolutely. So don't be afraid to get creative. Places that are easily rentable and rentable for reasonable amounts of money. Summer camps. There are we live in Massachusetts, and there are lots and lots of summer camps around here that are LARP friendly, and even a great portion of them that are at this point catering to LARPs because they that LARPs have been providing their sustainable income for the last 10 years. So they're oh please come here LARPers, we have a cool LARP camp, it's here for LARPing. So
Where was Pokemon LARP at?
Pokemon LARP was at Camp Eagle Pass. Yes, and that is a designated LARP camp. It is very much designed for LARPing. There are specific mod hall spaces and cool stuff like that. Summer camps. You can Google so many summer camps. Also, the Greater LARP organization network has lots of experiences with these camps and can tell you a lot about the personalities involved and like the challenges that might be involved with different, you know, one site versus another.
And this is coming back to the Slack groups.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, just feel free to hit me up. I'm like connected to the Whisper network. I'll let you know.
Just do a Facebook message out of the blue.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what do you know about this camp? I'm like, no, don't. Hotel ballrooms and boardrooms. These are rentable. Some of them like even online really cheaply. There's also, if you, I would check out breather.com. Breather.com allows you to rent out rooms, like different function rooms, for really cheap, like between 20 and 80 bucks an hour. And so if you're running like a 4-hour parlor game, that like ends up not being very much money at all.
$700 renting fee each owner.
Exactly.
Breather.com?
Breather. Mm-hmm. And they have breather spaces like in cities all around the U.S. and globally. They're
Some of them
starting
are
to
stunning
develop.
spaces too.
What's that?
Some of them are really like
They're beautiful.
spaces. Yeah.
Exactly. They're really nice spaces, and like that can add to the production value of what you're doing like a lot. Community centers. These things still exist. Did you know that there's a community center in Cambridge, like that's just down River Street? They have rentable, really big function rooms that you can rent for like stupid cheap, like 15 bucks an hour, 30 bucks an hour. Like these things are very accessible. Fellowship institutions, so like the Oddfellows, Masons, Elks, the VFW, the Knights of Columbus, etc. There are so many of these different organizations. A lot of them are really, really excited to get people into their spaces because they are kind of like struggling organizations that have aging membership, and they are don't have a lot of people renting out their spaces or utilizing the space. So they have these spaces available, and they tend to be huge function halls. Like you can see downstairs here, huge function halls. I mean, this space, like they were kind enough to donate this space for our workshop today, which is amazing. And you know, and some of these organizations are now becoming very LARP affiliated. Like lots of LARPers are joining some of these organizations. And I know that they are offering like steep discount rates for LARPs who are running in those spaces, because a lot of the people who are organizing those communities now are LARPers themselves, and they want to support the hobby. Bars and restaurants with private dining. This can be great if you're trying to build a very immersive environment. Usually you'll have some kind of like minimum charge, but if you're doing it on an off night, a lot of restaurants are just excited to have you in there. So you can negotiate with them and be like, tell you what, I'll guarantee you a minimum of like $500 at the bar, and if we hit that minimum, then no charge. But otherwise, I'll meet you at whatever the minimum isn't. And then you just tell everyone, like you can give people kind of like drink tickets or a pass or something, so that they know that their purchases are going towards the minimum. And then people, just in the normal course of spending money on like food and drink, what they would be doing normally are paying for the space. So that could be another good way to do that. Again, don't be afraid to negotiate with restaurant owners. They're gonna be like, okay, we want $500 for the room, and you just be like, no.
Sorry.
No, this is a Tuesday night. I know you're not gonna get the traffic otherwise. How about like we'll meet a minimum?
In Boston, they really are like open to negotiation.
Absolutely.
Do you have a vague sense of like what is a reasonable minimum?
Reasonable minimum is like $500 for a minimum for an off night. For an on night, like a Saturday or Sunday, $2,000 minimum at like more popular places. In order to utilize the space like fully. You can negotiate that down if you're like, we're open to other people being in the area with us. Like that would be fine. Like if you're like, oh, we're going to a brewery, and on an on night they might be like, okay, $500 minimum for you to be here, but also like this function room will be kind of yours, but other people from the public will be in and about and around. That's doable usually. Colleges. So a lot of LARPers are in the academic persuasion, and a lot of LARPers, up and coming LARPers, are students, and have access to rooms that you can book through clubs and stuff like that. I spent like all of college, like not studying, but instead utilizing my club memberships to book LARP rooms, like to book really, really cool spaces at Columbia and Barnard, where I then ran like a bunch of really cool LARPs, which was the best, it turns out, the best career experience I possibly could have gotten. So yeah, professor or administrator or students can usually book spaces for free for you at colleges, which is a great way to go about that. I know MIT is like very supportive of this, right? Like the MIT Assassin's Guild has a lot of. Are these even booked spaces though, or are these Assassin's Guild just kind of like? Just like.
No, the guild definitely is reserving rooms.
Okay.
Yeah, like 10 years ague, they definitely booked rooms. I don't know if they're under new and more aggressive management these days. Guerrilla LARPing.
Theaters. So you might be surprised to find that a lot of theaters are extremely open to this format, that they think it's really cool, and that they're welcoming of people who are doing these experimental kinds of things in their theater spaces. So whether it's a black box theater, you might be able to negotiate with them and be like, hey, this is like an experimental, like, live action improvisational, like art form. Can we book this black box theater for like, for cheaper than the rates that you have on here, where like a nonprofit group, like a lot of times they're open to that. Also, there are in theaters though, you can also so I've been working closely with the Oberon Theater recently. The Oberon Theater is they have a bar minimum that you need to reach in order to utilize the theater and put on productions there. But that's the cost of the space. The cost of the space is the bar minimum. That is some calculation that's they have transparency in it, but I can't tell you what it is right now because I just can't remember it off the top of my head. But with that also comes they're a full staff and people who are running sound and lighting for you and other crazy stuff like that. So if you're going high level production, look into your local theaters and you may be able to negotiate something really, really cool for everybody. Rehearsal studios. A lot of theaters have rehearsal spaces specifically set aside. You can usually book these for super cheap. So even at primetime theaters that are down on Tremont Street, they will have rehearsal studios that you can book for $20 an hour, $30 an hour, and you can run LARPs in there, and it's a great way to do it. Be careful when you're booking different dance studios or other theater studios because they may have rules about wearing shoes. And so ask about that. Make sure that you're aware of the rules and restrictions that exist for that. But if you're if you're playing a shoeless game, then we'll be fine. So call these places. A lot of these places are not great at email communication. So some of them are. Some of the here, Tyler's extremely responsive and we'll get back to you on email, no problem. But a lot of times, just calling people on the phone and talking to them is going to be your fastest way to get to a yes and to get to a solution. Especially some of these fellowship institutions tend to be run by older people who are not great at email communication, but they're super great at phone communication. So if you just call them, I know that there's an anxiety that arises around utilizing the phone in a way that's not texting people or checking your Facebook, but it's really, really worthwhile to just gird your loins and do it.
I'll add that another level of that is also just going to a place and
Yeah.
just going to talk to someone in person.
Absolutely, definitely.
And another suggestion of a creative venue, depending on what your LARP is and really what you're going for, is churches. Especially some of the very older churches that maybe have a much smaller membership now that aren't doing weeknight activities or even Saturday activities.
Yeah.
So
That's awesome. Absolutely.
From the peanut gallery again. If you are nervous to make phone calls, recruit someone on your team who doesn't have that nervousness.
Find your extrovert.
Your team positioning designated extrovert.
Find your local Gryffindor to help you with that.
Yeah,
you're not all Gryffindors.
What did you say?
Wrong house definition. We just tell ourselves, oh, fucking be brave and pick up the goddamn phone, but that doesn't mean we like it.
right.
Was that?
Yeah, Hufflepuff, yeah.
Sorry, what? Hufflepuff?
Hufflepuff are happy about.
Okay, so insurance. Not all LARPs need insurance. If you're running like a 4-hour parlor game, you probably don't need insurance for it. But if you're running a buffer game, you will need insurance for it because there's physical combat involved. I would say, like as a general rule of thumb, it would be really nice if you were always insured. So joining a LARP organization that can like cover you for all of your events could be great.
Cautionary tale, I recently did a parlor LARP where a light fixture fell down in the middle of the room because of something I had done, switching out a light bulb in the room. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but
yeah, so it could have been really bad.
Yeah.
And so if you have event insurance that can cover like incidentals like that, like, you know, if somebody had gotten hit by that, then that would have been real bad. Because like there's like personal liability involved, there's money involved, there's like it's gonna be real difficult. Most event insurances will cover like between $1 million and $2 million worth of of damages for stupid cheap amounts of money. For like $300, you have $1 million worth of coverage. I personally recommend Bartow Insurance. If you go to bartowinsurance.com. Jason Bartow has been working with the LARP community for many years, to the point where he even has like a designed like packet for LARP specific insurance, where you can like check off the boxes of what you need and like fill out a little thing, and he will instantly get you a quote back. That's like for annual coverage, for event coverage, for like all this stuff. It's really worthwhile to have insurance, and it's so much easier than everybody thinks it is. It's like you talk to Jason, he gives you a quote, you give him money, done.
Do you, maybe this is too personal, do you also carry a general liability for yourself?
Only if I am doing like something that could be specifically dangerous. Like if I'm doing like fire art performing, or if I'm doing a circus arts kind of act or something like that, then I would have personal insurance. But like generally, no. Like for most of what we're doing, we generally don't need it. Your event insurance will cover will cover most of that stuff. But if you're doing a sword swallowing routine as a part of your LARP, then like you may want to have personal like insurance for that.
Well, sorry, not so much insurance for yourself, but just as an extra coverage for your.
In case of being sued.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you they tend to be under like performers licenses, performers insurance.
Okay.
And so you like if you ask actually Jason about that, he has like coverage for those specific things as well. So if you wanted to, you could, but generally you don't need it. Disclaimer: I am not a lawyer. Okay, staffing. All right, so this is where we start to get into like the nitty-gritty of how you're gonna do this thing. So you may have success otherwise, but I find that games tend to run smoothly when you have someone who is in charge, who is like the head decision maker, buck stops here person. Now that person doesn't need to be they don't need to be like doing all of the artistic direction of the game or all of this part of the game or all of that, but they do need to be able to, in a moment of crisis, be like, we're doing A, go. And people need to respect that person's decision and respect their word. So you need leadership, I've seen games where people have tried to like split up the leadership, and it can become really contentious really quickly. So having like a single person that can make a decision, and the other people will respect that decision, can work really well. I've also seen games where there were people who completely co-ran and co-did everything, but they also like shared a brain, so it's fine, So I would say like do what works best for you, do what feels right for you, but it's I do find that it tends to work well to be able to say like, okay, we can't agree, we're gonna ask person A to make a decision about what's gonna happen, and that can be easier. So, regardless of what you decide to do, you should be able to make a plan for how you're going to resolve conflicts that may arise, because they will. They just will. So, you want to establish what roles and responsibilities are actually being assumed, what the expectations are surrounding delivery of those responsibilities, and then what are the consequences if somebody fails to meet those expectations. Now, this kind of sucks, because we're talking about firing volunteers. right? Which is terrible. But at the same time, like, if you're really counting on someone to bring this prop to a game and that person says, oh, I'm gonna do it, and that prop is essential for your plot functioning, and they show up and they don't have the prop, then now you're really stuck, right? Now this can become really difficult. So there needs to be some sort of like pre-established, before any conflict arises, we all agree what the roles and responsibilities are, how we plan on delivering those things, and then what the consequences are if we don't.
What kind of consequences can you give to volunteers?
Like, don't, like, you're demoted. You're no longer in charge of props because you didn't bring the props.
So if it's a designation system where
Sure.
you are a prop master, now you're not a prop master.
Yeah, exactly.
Now
Exactly.
this person you hate is prop master.
Yeah.
Social pressure.
Or it could be something like along the lines of like, okay, the consequences are that like, you lose that responsibility, but that also may be a good thing, right? Like if someone's like, I thought that I could do this thing, and now I can't. It's much better though for that person to raise their hand and say that they can't before the disaster happens rather than after. So. I mean, it can. Like, I've seen it happen, like, where someone's like, I'm gonna be in charge of this thing, and then a week beforehand, they're like, I can't do this. Like, I'm so sorry. My cat is dying. I'm in a bad emotional state. I can't function right now. Like, someone else needs to take this off my plate. And it's like, cool. Thank you for letting us know. Like, here's the space you need in order to feel better. Like, we'll send you chocolate and love, and someone else will pick this responsibility up and run with it. But like establishing good, like known ways for people to raise their hand if they're having trouble is essential to this.
There's a tipping point you hit in communities where it's like that never happens, that never happens, and now it's like expected.
Yeah.
And now if you're the person who doesn't do it, you're sort of like, what happened?
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
Aging often helps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's not a guarantee.
Well, not an odd question, but do you recommend kind of overstaffing a little bit as kind of a form of contingency plan?
You absolutely can. I mean, I would say
'cause I know there's like a cost risk and a time risk with that.
you are always going to like when you first start a game, everyone is going to be super bought in and 100% there for it and really excited and have all these plans and responsibilities that they want to take on and like promises that they make and everything like that. And then by the next game, like half the people will show up with that. And then the game after that, like half of those people will show up with that. And it's impossible to determine who those people will be at the outset of your game. Because different circumstances will arise that you cannot foresee. Like two people will be both equally excited and then they just don't get along. They just rub each other the wrong way.
Yeah.
Right? And that's difficult because both of them were super excited and now they're both kind of like, ugh, well now I don't want to attend staff meetings because this person bothers me
and you don't want to pick between them.
Yeah, exactly. So things like that arise and that is just humans being human and it's totally okay. So I would say like, staff, accept as much help as people will give you initially. And then you can start to you'll start to see the patterns of like who is really bought in and will show up for stuff and who is like good for showing up to events, but maybe like don't count on them for like pre-planning or anything like that. That stuff will start to naturally emerge like as you go through the course of these things. It's okay. It's all okay. It's okay for things to go sideways. It's okay for people to drop balls. It's okay for these things to not happen. But as the creator of your game, you need to keep showing up for it. And you need to be willing to weather some of those difficult times, because they're gonna happen. Even in the best teams I've ever been on, we had periods where we were like, cool, all right, great, we all need to not talk for 2 entire days.
Yeah.
And I will see you in 48 hours, because there's just not even if you absolutely love each other to death, you're going to have differences of opinions. It's just gonna happen. And I'll get into managing staff conflicts a little bit later.
This may come up later. This may in fact be enough for its own day-long talk. But how do you do succession planning in staff? Because I have seen a lot of longer running organizations that just like, we're good, the natural succession has stopped. Ah!
Yeah. Well, I think that part of it is identifying what the responsibilities are that the person, like that whoever is like leaving the position and then there is need for succession for, identifying what those responsibilities are that person might have been managing, and then maybe divvying them up. Like, because you may not be able to, like, if you had someone who had a lot of like spinning plates in the air, then, and that person's like, I can't do this anymore, then expecting someone to come in and just grab all the plates that they were spinning might be a fraught and very, like, lots of broken shards of plate everywhere, and lots of upset people. So identifying, like, okay, what plate did you have spinning here? Great, we're gonna give that to one person. Okay, now we give this other spinning plate to one person. So that you're not trying to, like, overburden everybody with like, just taking on, like, this massive amount of responsibility. So yeah, identifying responsibilities. And that means, like, that you need to have some like, your staff needs to have an awareness of what they are doing. So having your staff, like, cataloging and writing down, like, what their actual, like, management activities are and what they're doing for the game, so that if they are leaving, that you have a documentation of, like, what responsibilities they were actually, like, holding. So here's, like, a common buffer org structure that I have found. You have, like, leadership, who's usually also kind of like a writer for the game, creator for the game. Leadership, which can be a team of leaders or, like, a single leader, like, or you can have a leadership team in which, like, someone is the buck stops here, like, final decision maker person. You have, like, a writing staff, and writing staff could be some of the leadership team. It could be like separate from the leadership team. You'll have, like, under them, you'll have, like, kind of your core writers, like people who are writing, like, who are going to be putting together a lot of the core aspects and plots for the game. And then you'll have, like, supplementary writers. These tend to be people who are, like, not great at showing up in plot staff meetings, but, like, they show up game of, and they are, like, so many ideas and brilliant. And you're just like, yeah, do it, just go, just do it, do what you do, go out there, make people happy. It's gonna be great.
Give somebody a costume and a bag of plot cookies.
Exactly, right? And like, I have met so many supplemental writers in my time who would never show up to a staff meeting. Like, will not do it, can't do it. Just like, there's just not, they don't have the ability. But they show up to the game and they're brilliant, you know, and you want to, like, make space for those people to exist. Like, you don't necessarily need to have, like, everyone be a core writer, no matter how brilliant they are. You know, having people who can, like, jump in and fill in stuff is great.
Can you explain? I'm not understanding the distinction between writing staff and core writers. It's like leadership of the writing group?
Yeah, this is just like, exactly. You'll have, like, leadership here, and then core writers who are, like, you might have somebody who's in charge of all the, like, political goings on, who's, like, the head writer for politics. But then you have core writers who are writing the different political things that are going on in each culture. And then that leader in the writing staff might be weaving together how all these things are working in the whole world.
Or you could have somebody, like, in charge of meta plot and have writers who are doing implementations of it.
Exactly. In writing teams that I've worked with in blockbuster LARPs, for example, like, we'll have, like, there's writing staff who are writing, like, a lot of the like, larger goings on and plots. And then there's core writers who are writing characters, like, specifically like NPC characters or player characters for people to be able to take on the roles of. And then supplemental writers will, like, be there on site to, like, quickly, like, react to what people are doing in the world. Leadership, so you've got your on-site staff, like, and some of these people, like, a lot of these people overlap. These are not just completely, like, separate groups. So you have on-site staff, so these are people who are going to show up to your game day of. Not all of your writing staff actually needs to be on-site, right? Like, you can have writers who write for your game, and then they don't enjoy, you know, weekend buffer campaigns, so they don't come to that, but they're happy to write cool stuff for you. So you have on-site staff, people who are going to be on-site, and your on-site staff is, like, your game runtime staff, and then your kind of back office staff. And your game runtime staff are going to be people like the NPC, like, people who are portraying NPCs, people who are portraying, like, roving monsters, people who are portraying, like, just anything that is going to go out externally facing into the world. And then you have your back office staff, who are people who are maybe managing logistics, like putting together, like folding and cleaning, costuming, preparing food for people, like all that stuff. So you kind of have like these different sections of the production house, like as it operates.
So on-site staff is the header for the game.
Yeah.
In the back.
Exactly. That's a common buffer org structure. Okay, now this is, I think, the hardest topic in all of everything that we've discussed so far, which is communication. So staff communication. This is the place where LARPs fall apart. Because you could put together all the pieces you need, you can even start running your game, but staff communication and like not having like healthy frameworks for staff communication can like kill your game and kill your friendships and like add a lot of like sadness and toxicity into the community. And so it's like, this is the hardest part. Because we're humans, and humans, we're flawed, so it's gonna be like that. So developing a healthy framework for staff interaction is vital to the health and momentum of your game. Everyone's coming from somewhere different, and it behooves you to establish honest, open communication and understand what boundaries may exist. So staff should be encouraged to do some self-assessment about emotional triggers. Like, we are emotional people, we all have different traumas and triggers and things in our background, and being aware of what those things are for ourselves and for the other people around us can help us to like be kind, compassionate, sensitive people to each other. So as someone in leadership, you also may want to get training about communication methods. There's a communication framework called nonviolent communication that I highly recommend reading the book for, and you can even take workshop courses in nonviolent communication. And these are extremely useful things to have when it comes to handling really stressful situations. Diving more into that. Okay, so this is just like an emotional trigger self-assessment that I took from Psychology Today. You know, like, you can find other emotional trigger self-assessment like paradigms out on the internet and other things like that. I thought that this was useful. You can Google emotional trigger self-assessment and find this. But this is kind of like a way for people to self-discover what emotional triggers they might have, right? So it's kind of walking people through the experience of like having a bad emotion. Why did you have that bad emotion? And like, you know, figuring out what those things are for you. So this is just some like exercises, and like this is just like the first 3. There's other ones that this goes into, but you know, like I think it's important to kind of like do some of these self-assessments because some people are highly self-aware about where their boundaries and triggers are. Other people need a little bit of help, like discovering those things. And so making it normalized for people to like do mental health exercises, I think is really, really good. Everybody is coming from somewhere different, and mental health issues are extremely prevalent in artistic communities, and it needs to be okay. It needs to be okay for people to understand, express, and like validate each other about these things. Okay, now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the nonviolent communication framework, because I have found this to be one of the most useful tools that I've ever found in my life for managing conflict and mitigating conflict. Nonviolent communication is used in negotiation, is used in all different kinds of psychology and mediation techniques, things like that. It's a restorative way for people to be able to understand the needs that they have and be able to kind of like not put, like to understand and own their emotions that they're having while still understanding the needs that are arising and why those needs are arising for them. So this is the nonviolent communication framework. So it's when I see blank, which is observable, specific actions. You know, something that you can like point to as a real action that happened. When I see blank, I feel blank. And this is an emotion, right? It's not I feel that it's unfair. Like, no, that's not an emotion. An emotion is one of these things: happy, sad, angry, afraid, or a synonym for any one of those things, right? When I see blank, I feel blank because I have a need for blank. And that need is usually something, this is the heart of the matter, right? This is something that if you can identify what that is, you can often resolve what that problem is.
Yeah, do you mind if I close those doors? I think they've got something open downstairs. It's like,
thank you.
yeah,
When you
are
close
the-
those doors,
I feel
I
happy because I have a need for warmth.
Like at the same time, KP our code, I was like, my legs feel cold. Why do my legs feel cold?
Yeah. So when I see this, I feel emotion because I have a need for whatever that is, like safety. I have a need for autonomy. I have a need for whatever it is. And then you have an ask, right? So which is, would you be willing to? And then you identify a specific action that someone could take to ameliorate or help that in order to help me. So if you understand this framework, then you can help coach people into being able to utilize this framework to resolve their conflicts, right? Very often when people get emotionally triggered, like they go into lizard brain state and you're in fight, flight, or freeze mode and you don't even know what's wrong. All you know is that like it's unfair and you're angry and it's not good and the other person is making you feel this way and they just need to stop that. And we can't identify our needs, we can't identify why we're feeling the way that we're feeling. So if you can utilize this framework, first of all, it helps because you're not putting blame on anyone, right? You're helping the person assume responsibility for their own emotions while helping them to identify the emotion, and then also being able to figure out why is this happening? Why is this arising for you? And then what would it take for you to feel better, right? Would you be willing to like when Dean, when I see you come into the room and sit next to Karen, I feel sad because I have a need for attention. And would you be willing to sit next to me to make me feel better, you know? And so, but here's where this stuff becomes like, where it gets a little hairy. So I want to identify the difference between an ask and a demand. So an ask is something that it's okay if the answer is no to. A demand is something that it's not okay if the answer is no to. It should be an ask, not a demand. Like it needs to be okay, it needs to be safe for someone to say no to what you're asking. So team communication can get heated, but it is not okay for staff to yell at each other. It's not okay, under any circumstance. Like we're like very often we are volunteers. We are volunteers, but acting in a professional capacity, and we just owe it to ourselves and to each other as human beings to just not yell at each other. It's not cool. So yeah, and also just try not to cross established boundaries. Like if you know an established boundary that somebody has, like if somebody has like a specific emotional trigger that's been identified, like as you have talked about these things on staff, don't cross that boundary with that person. Like if somebody's getting misgendered and that's really not okay for them, it's important to stand up for that and say, hey, this made me feel this way, and let's fix it.
I know I've got a million questions here. Is there part of this, like in the wider literature or whatever, that deals with kind of how to report a bad action or a bad actor to a third party or a person in authority? So I'm kind of thinking back to my grade school experiences and how hard it was for me to explain why somebody's teasing was wrong and like made me feel uncomfortable or unsafe, and it looked innocuous when I explained it because I didn't have the tools to do that. I'm wondering if there's resources around this to help with that.
I would say that you would probably want to cover those things in your safety policies, like in terms of like reporting and like escalation of issues.
Well, like I'm thinking like ways to train staff to help people reporting explain things. It's like how to frame something, like how to help somebody frame something in a way that makes sense and isn't going to be read in a week or a month when you're going over the safety reports and doing after actions as, why was this a safety report again? Because it seems so innocuous. It's like, oh, he kept telling me he liked me. well, okay, why is that bad? Why is Bobby telling Susie that he likes her?
Well, I think it's not necessarily about it's not about the person's intention, it's about the way it's received.
No, exactly. It's
And
just
so
kind of like how to help people explain those things. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble communicating this.
No worries. I think that like as part of your staff training, you may want to just like really drive home that idea for people of like, no matter what someone's intention might be, the thing that matters for the person receiving it is how they receive it.
Yeah.
And harm is harm, like whether it's intended or not. And it's not okay to not acknowledge that. Like it's better to acknowledge the harm and say like that was not my intention at all. I'm so sorry, and like be able to move on from there, as opposed to say like, well, that's not what I intended, and like you're being too sensitive, and like that's not okay. Like now I'm angry. Now you have to apologize to me. Like let's just skip a step here and just be like, okay, but what was received is what's important.
There's also some really good advice and pointers in when you were saying to look into existing broader LARP organizations. Because like Red Set Role Playing has a specific person for things like that, for communication of, this happened and I feel this, and they actually do have someone specifically for conflict resolution, and actually do have steps and are very transparent in their process of how this works.
Absolutely. Yeah, they have an ombudsman person.
That's the
Ombudsman.
Yeah,
Ombudsman?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank
If
you.
I can take a quick stab at answering.
Sure.
It's you have a designated safety officer with a pre-written, pre-published process of how reports get handled, and that process has specific deadlines on it. So literally all you're doing is, because the assumption is the safety officer is going to be looking at this someday after only have gotten 5 hours of sleep for the last few nights.
Yeah.
And so they're just sort of like, what the fuck did we agree on? Okay, tick, 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 tick. Anyone can follow this? Where I got this all from, deep feminism.
From what?
Deep feminism, maybe?
Okay.
You know,
Yep.
great amount of resources.
Tons of resources, and I think that they're like steel systems for these things. Like
Oh, wow.
people are happy to share them because they're
Totally. I mean, I'm kind of looking for stuff to go for right now, partly because I'm part of a regio, which is kind of dealing with some of this stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I know.
Understatements.
Kind of dealing with this stuff.
Yeah, understatement of the day. Anyway, I don't want to derail any more. I know this is an important topic, but also deadlines.
Fair. All right. Clear communication. This is the portion of the talk where I talk about LARP safety systems. There exist both physical and emotional safety systems. As an example, there's the check-in system, which is like giving someone like a little thumbs up, making sure they're okay. If that person's okay, they give you a thumbs up right back. Move about your day. If that person gives you a waggle or a thumbs down, give them space. So that's a check-in system that exists and a lot of LARPs are using nowadays. There's also the bow-out system, which is if you introducing, this happens at games where they're dealing with lots and lots of very adult content, where it's if you come across something that makes you uncomfortable, hand on head like this, leave. And then there's also content warnings. I think that this is super important as you're communicating to your players. Having content warnings both written ahead of time about what the content of the game could contain. That might be even not even things that might be emotional triggers for people, but also things that are just going to be themes in your game. You know, like I've made the mistake of like thinking that I had clear content like descriptions, and then having people be surprised by content that was in my game. So I have gotten to be better and better over time at being really specific with people, both giving them advanced warning about what the content might be, and then giving them warning before they enter into a specific scene that has specifically upsetting content, of being like, the following scene contains, you know, blood and whipped cream and like all of the you know, just like here's what to expect in this next scene that you're going to encounter. Do you want to proceed? You know, like, so giving people.
Sometimes the same thing would be bad if it's not expected, but it's okay when someone's prepared that they're going to be.
Exactly. And so I would say, like, no, not only be aware of giving people content warnings like ahead of time, but also during production. Like, before somebody enters into a scene, don't be afraid to pause game, like hand on head, like, you know, fingers crossed, whatever your like out of game signal is, to give somebody a verbal content warning about what the next scene is going to contain, so that they can choose to opt out before they have to bow out, like, because they're already in an upset state, you know? So don't be afraid to be super specific and clear with people about what they're going to encounter. More and more players are expecting to have good frameworks for communicating about how they're feeling during their experience, both in real time and pre and post event. So it's wonderful to support this, but also keep in mind that unless you are a trained psychologist, you're not a trained psychologist. Right? So it can be really dangerous to pretend that you are one. So I like don't you are not you, if you're not a trained psychologist, then you taking on all of that extra emotional labor can really hurt you and like be very harmful. Please be kind to yourself. It's important to have boundaries of your own, and for you to say, I'm sorry, but like I really appreciate that you're telling me this and sharing this with me, but this is crossing a boundary for me, and I don't feel comfortable anymore. It's okay to take that space for yourself.
If you are not a trained psychologist, it's possible that in your attempts to help somebody, you can make it worse.
Exactly. You can harm them, and that can be really, really bad. So communicating your boundaries and letting players know those boundaries is a good way to just keep everyone on the same page and make sure everybody's having a good experience. So yeah, don't pretend to be a psychologist if you're not one. It's great that LARPs are adopting safety systems and that we're having safety officers and that we're like giving people more training around these things. But like, don't fall into the trap of thinking that you can solve everyone's problem. Like, you're not going to be able to. And there are professional resources that exist for these things, especially with LARPs that deal with really intense themes. Like, you don't want to start wading around in that pool. You know, it can be very, very harmful to you and to your players.
I mean, my like wide extended social circle, it's almost become like meme kind of devalues and disrespects it a little bit, but like that's like I appreciate that you shared this with me, but that seems like something you should talk about with your therapist.
Right. Yeah, it's okay to set boundaries.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, like, do you think it would be appropriate, honestly, if somebody brings something like that to the table, to the debrief, to actually recommend that they see a therapist about something?
I mean, I think that
feels
like
it could cross a line.
the way that you would want to frame it is like, hey, I feel distinctly underqualified to be able to handle this, and like I'm really sorry, but that's like something that I don't feel like I have the resources to help with. There might be other resources that you could look into, like I know there are therapeutic resources that like could help with this, but that's not something that I can do. But I wouldn't be like, you need a therapist.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
there might not be a therapist. Frame that.
Someone inside.
Right. Okay, so player communications, more of that. So setting expectations, it's super important to set expectations, to set clear expectations. So this means kind of stepping through that player journey and writing down what it'll be like so that people have a clear like understanding of what things are going to be like. So for example, you want to maybe just start out your entire rulebook with like your tone and aesthetic, what gameplay will be like, who's running the game, so that they have an idea. Like I cannot tell you how many times I see LARP websites where they have no information about who is running the game. And that really puts me off of running the game, because I'm like, I don't know who these people are, and like, not that I need to see like a list of their credentials, but it would be kind of nice to just put a face with a name, you know? Like, I want to know where the stuff is coming from, and also like as a LARP designer, it's okay for you to have credit for like your designs. That's cool too. So who's running the game? What your safety policies are, then your rules and your blue sheets and your like runtime information and all the other stuff that like, people are going to need to know. So I want to show you an example in the Pocket Monsters document.
Can we say what a blue sheet is?
Blue sheets are basically like supplemental rules information that you often get. So it might be like a blue sheet for the general setting. Here's the general setting blue sheet. Here is the, like, you're a fairy in this game. Here's the fairy lore blue sheet.
So specific.
Yeah.
Generally, blue that's denote different than your like other character pack information.
Yeah.
Or like not, I don't know if it's still blue anymore, but like.
Yeah, it's a term that has been adopted by the con-going LARP community for like supplemental like rules or information.
So it's like stuff, I don't know the term, it's stuff you need to know, but not everybody needs to know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
It's usually specific to groups.
Yep.
There's the CIA blue sheet, KGB blue sheet.
Exactly.
Oh, that's where that originated from?
I'm actually thinking, I'm looking at that originated from paranoia.
Oh, I know, that's how I came from.
The paranoia, the red book, the paranoia, everything's color coded, and theoretically you're supposed to start with the player knowledge is supposed to be contained. The initial player knowledge anyway is supposed to be just everything in the little red book, and it's like literally 8 sheets of paper.
Yeah, yeah. That's cool. All right, so now I'm going to show you the Pocket Monsters document because I think it's a good example of like expectation setting for people, right? So, game overview. What is this game? It's a dark comedy horror survival LARP. Like in this play, you play a freshly hatched wild Pokemon. Like your other trainers and humans are played by staff. For copyright purposes, this game is a work of parody. You run around in the woods at a private campsite we've rented for 40 hours pretending to be an adorable Pokemon. Then we ruin your childhood. You know, like, you can't read that paragraph and not know what this game is about. You know, like, they're good. Now we know what that is. Tone and aesthetic. Great. Now we're going to talk about this game unabashedly straddles over-the-top camp and survival horror. Our intent to make a game that is fun, sometimes scary, and often ridiculous. Great. Now, as a player, I know, like, what this game is. I know how it's going to feel. And then, you know, I just gave, like, what is a LARP? We all know that, so I'm not going to go over that. What to expect. So I spent a lot of time building up the what to expect section because you can just completely get rid of like a lot of questions by having a really good like what to expect section. So I'm just going to read this. Over the course of the weekend, we expect a lot of players to be captured, maybe even all of them. This is totally okay and should not impact your ability to interact and have fun. Because that was the first question. People are like, well, what if I get captured really early? You know, the first question people asked. So now I'm allaying that fear. Though we tell you that Pokemon can only say their names around humans, being captured doesn't mean that you won't get to roleplay all weekend. You'll be given ample opportunities to interact without any human NPCs around, even if you get captured early. In fact, some players may want to get captured as part of their strategy. For example, you know that you don't want to be caught by Team Rocket, so you may want to be instead caught by Ash Ketchum, so you seek out the trainer you want to be caught by. There are 3 sorts of NPCs. There are Pokemon trainers like Ash, Misty, the gym leaders, bug catchers, fishermen, etc. There are Pokemon scientists like Professor Oak and the other Pokemon professors. And there's Team Rocket, who are Jesse James and the Rocket Grunts and Meowth and all that stuff. So, this game was epic. Okay.
How long ago did it run?
Like a year and a half ago? Yeah, year and a half ago. Only trainers in Team Rocket will actively be trying to capture Pokemon. There will be Pokemon gym modules that constantly run through groups of Pokemon, up to 6 at a time, that they can attempt with or without a trainer. In a gym, you cannot be captured. Gyms are attempted in order, like the Kanto classic order, and in order to get to the next gym, you have to have the badge from the previous gym, or be with the trainer who has the badge. Badges are tradable in-game items. So you can, like, somebody could have gone in a gym and then they can give you their badge so you can attempt the next gym. There will be Pokemon Center / daycare where meals and snacks are provided and everyone go for healing 24/7. Pokemon battles cannot be initiated in the daycare or center, but that does not mean that Pokemon are safe from capture them. Don't loiter too long or think you're safe, because you're not. All sleeping areas are considered out of game. Please don't go into them as a means of escaping a trainer. That's total cheese. Use them for sleeping and personal needs. We will serve 3 meals over the course of the weekend, breakfast on Saturday and Sunday mornings, and dinner on Saturday night. We'll do our best to accommodate food needs, but if you have a really special diet, you may want to bring your own food. We'll also have snacks and drinks available all weekend. There's lots more fun stuff to discover, but we can't tell you because it's a surprise. Expect lots of ridiculous fun. And then we just walk through kind of like who we are. Then we talk about our safety policy. And this is all of our, harassment and discrimination policies as well. It contains like our values, and it contains, and then we get into like the safety systems, right? We've got safety calls for physical safety. We have this like the be cool rule. This is like just a good way to step people into what to expect. So we wrote this what to expect on the basis of like all of the different questions that we got initially, right? You can avoid getting a bajillion questions initially by writing out a really good what to expect section. If you imagine you're a player and you don't have any information about your game, what are the questions that are going to arise? And if you walk through the player journey, what is going to happen to them when they arrive? What's going to happen to them like after that? Like you can really do a good job at like letting people know how they're going to be interacting with their game if you do a good job at expectations.
Do you adjust how you frame games, like this whole document?
Mm-hmm.
Was this game for people that knew LARP? Because there's a section here about what is LARP. Or was this like a...
We knew that this game was going to attract Pokemon fans who are non-LARPers. So we wanted to make this as clear as possible so that people who had never LARPed before felt comfortable coming into a setting like this and being able to interact.
Having not seen the section that you wrote, how much of the definition there came from the specific way you wanted people to think about the world? You said the section that said, what is LARP?
Yeah.
Oh, it's pretty basic.
That's pretty
Pretty
good.
basic.
Yeah. So none.
But everything else does.
Yeah.
And we talked about
Yeah.
safety policies, we talked about progressive rules.
Yeah, exactly. And we definitely adjusted towards assuming that fans of Pokemon and fans of games would be reading this document, and that we wanted to make them feel comfortable being like, oh, I can try this. Oh, I can do this. Like, this is not a high barrier to entry for me.
How many PCs did you have, roughly?
We capped out, so we capped at, gosh, what was it, 50 players?
And how many NPCs or staff?
We ended up with like almost 30 staff because people were so excited to do it, and it was phenomenal.
And
It was so much fun.
PCs, how many have 11 before?
Oh yeah,
Or so, like,
Probably 8 to 10.
I
So
would
small percentage.
Yeah.
NPCs or PCs?
Pieces.
Oh, only 8 to 10 hadn't one before.
Yeah. Because it was like the players were really, really, really excited to be Pokemon. Okay. So.
Now I kind of want this to be a video game, just because the idea of like a Pikachu wandering into a gym and going and like wanting to fight.
Yeah.